Hey there, Paul.
How's it going, John? Good to see you.
It's going good. Good to see you too. I'm glad you're here. Did you say you had to leave early? I hope not.
Yeah.
Oh, you do need to leave early.
Yeah.
Too bad. We've had a bunch of potential attrition from this meeting.
No.
Yeah, but good to have folks here who are here.
Yeah. We were doing the second set of 4 interviews for the CAS DNVS position. And so they're scheduled starting at 2.
That's right. Swapna had mentioned that that she wasn't going to make it because of that.
Yeah. On the plus side, I think the interviews are going well.
Oh, that's good. We got a good group of candidates.
I'm hopeful. I mean, we're only halfway through,
well, if you've got a good group in the first half, then you know you have a good group.
Yeah. So,
well, bless your heart for serving on that.
I do what I can. Actually, I enjoy hiring. An opportunity to meet a bunch of people from all over, and so we're hiring in econ. Selfishly, a great way for me to expand my network in both situations. So,
well, that's great.
Yeah, it is interesting from when I was on the job market just how many people keep popping up. I'll be citing their work or see them at conferences or something like that. So,
well, that's neat.
Yeah.
Oops, my computer just went off. Rebecca, I created a sort of minute section right below this. You probably already see that. Is that true? Rebecca, did you hear me on that? I created a little. Yeah. Okay. Good. I didn't see a response. Nice to see that you show up in this new video that Josh Jensen shared with me on the SIP. I don't know if you've seen that video yet, but I mean, I'm sure you know that you were interviewed, but you ended up in the final cut, so you're in that. You look good in there. You look you're the student representative on there. You're the only student interviewed on it. It's good. It's a good little piece of PR. Remember being interviewed. I think you were in the that sort of second floor room that they like to interview people on in the it may have been a long time ago. It could have been a year ago. Who knows how long ago it was. But yeah. Oh, it was Claire. I thought it was Rebecca. Janae, you think it was Claire? Okay, my fault. It wasn't you.
Of course, Rebecca does everything amazingly, so we just assume she's going to be picked for all the things.
Okay. Well, we are 2 minutes late, but I want to at least make sure Cindy gets here because I know she's coming here. And then as soon as Cindy's here, we're going to go ahead and start. But alas, and there we go. I think we've got a full contingent now. We had a number of folks who sort of canceled last meeting. Obviously, this is an interim time for Oberlin College between semester and winter term. So I think we have some attrition, but I'm real pleased to be joined today by Bob Hanmer, who's the fire chief for Oberlin, who most of you have not seen at a CES meeting before, anyways. Even if you know Bob from other contexts. But as you know, I wrote in the agenda, what we're doing today, and we discussed before, is we're going to give you a bit of a kind of taste of the presentation of the vulnerability assessment, the climate vulnerability assessment for the city of Oberlin. And Bob's going to tell you a little bit more about that process in a second. But that's basically our agenda item today, is to give you a bit of the presentation that we gave to Oberlin City Council, which summarizes a lot of information on the climate vulnerability assessment, and then talk a little bit about the adaptation planning process going on now. And I guess maybe I'll say at the start of this whole thing, there were a lot of groups and individuals in the community engaged in this process. And there's a follow-up climate adaptation planning task force that's ongoing now that Bob and Jane and Linda and I are leading. And it's very impressive how groups within the Oberlin community have begun to really take the information in the vulnerability assessment that we will present to you, and really are kind of running with it in terms of building it into their strategic planning processes. And obviously this is something that's critical for Oberlin College to do as well. And there were many Oberlin College people involved in the process. But I guess sort of our goal today is to present this to you and then have a little bit of time at the tail end for brainstorming on how do we want to, what does this mean for Oberlin College and for the particular, departments that are represented within CES? How do we want to sort of think about moving forward? Because, Kevin Brown represents Oberlin College on that task force. But obviously Oberlin is a big entity and has many departments, all of which are going to be dealing with adaptation things. So let me go ahead and share my screen. We were going to have a, hold on, I gotta find the right screen to share. I've got two different screens open, and I actually want to see, I want it to be my other computer that I'm sharing. Show all windows. Hold on, sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to share my other screen. Here we go, screen 2. Too many darn windows open. All right, hopefully you guys are looking at a screen that has the CES agenda on it. Is that true? Thumbs up if that's true. Okay, great. We were going to have a brief update today from Josh Jensen, but he actually had an emergency come up. He's going to be sending around a SIP video, a video on the Sustainable Infrastructure Plan that will be going out next week to the whole group later today that I got a chance to preview. In some ways, there wasn't a lot of point in us giving immediate feedback because apparently it's in the pipeline. It's going out next week, but he hopes to get us more engaged before things go out next round. But at any rate, I'm going to go ahead and as I say, let me just get this thing in slideshow mode. Okay, hopefully you guys are seeing a slideshow on your screen. Oops, I don't want to be there at all. Let's get back to the beginning of this presentation. Yowza, getting a sense of the duration of this thing. All right, starting on slide 1. So again, this is a process that has been going on for several years, but really kicked in force as a public enterprise about a year ago. Sort of kicked off, and I'll go ahead and turn things over to Bob to say a little bit about the process. So Bob, you're on. And you're muted.
Hello, everybody. My name is Bob Handler. I'm the fire chief at the City of Oberlin. I'm pleased to be here today with the City of Oberlin Sustainability Coordinator, Linda Arbogast, and the Oberlin College Environmental Studies Professor, John Peterson, and Jane Verleski, who was, I'm sorry, Jane, if I butchered your last name there. Jane was one of 15 college students who played a key role throughout the initial phase of Oberlin, the City of Oberlin's climate vulnerability and adaptation planning process. It starts with a couple of words about the process, describe the impetus for the work we are engaged in, and presentation and discussion this afternoon. A few years ago, our city manager, Rob Hiller, presented me with the task of producing a plan to make the community more resilient to climate change. This makes sense to me since my job focuses on emergency planning and preparedness, and our department's primary mission is to protect lives, property, and the environment. As I was diving into this task, I quickly realized that the project was bigger than the fire department issue and had a lot to do with the tremendous amount of work that our city sustainability coordinator, Linda Arbogast, has been.
Bob, you're muted. You accidentally muted yourself.
I hope you can hear me now. Thumbs up. Okay, good. Let's see, where did I lose off on you guys? So I was diving into this task. I quickly realized this project was bigger than just a fire department issue, and has a lot to do with the tremendous amount of work that our city sustainability coordinator, Linda Arbogast, has been working on. Linda and I began working on this piece together and found that we were missing a key component, a climate vulnerability assessment. The City of Oberlin's 2020 update to its climate action plan highlighted the need for a climate vulnerability assessment and adaptation planning as a crucial next step in the planning. Through conversations with John Peterson, the three of us collectively recognized that both the educational opportunity and the practical value of engaging a group of Oberlin College students to assist in the planning process as researchers and to assist in coordinating and soliciting the organization input from community members. During the spring of 2021, student collaborators in a special class focused on assisting the city in developing its climate vulnerability assessment. These students played a variety of critical roles excuse me, in all of these processes, and I wanted to acknowledge them for their important contributions to their process. They did an outstanding job throughout their quarter that they worked on this project. At the same time, it's important to recognize that their role and our role has focused squarely on conducting a community-based process in which the goal has been discovered, summarized, and shared insights of the community leaders. We engaged 54 leaders from the Oberlin community in discussions and interviews to derive insights into climate risk for the Oberlin and what we might do to enhance adaptive capacity.
So Linda and Bob and I set out with three core goals at the start of this process. The first was to compile the best available scientific information related to specific climate hazards likely to impact the Oberlin community, and then translate these into a form that would be easily accessible to members of the Oberlin community. The second was to engage a diverse group of leaders in the Oberlin community in considering the particular risks associated with these climate hazards on different aspects of the Oberlin community, and to consider adaptive capacity and adaptive options. And then the third goal was to summarize the insights revealed through these discussions as information that can be used to inform further decision-making actions that reduce community vulnerabilities and enhance the adaptive capacity. So our goals today are really to describe the overall process and summarize the climate vulnerability assessment, and then to sort of get feedback from CES and really figure out where we go with this within Oberlin College. Let me talk a little bit about where we're sort of going to go in this presentation. This is a bit of a roadmap of what we're going to try to talk about before we turn to discussion today. We have a bit to cover and want to assure that there is time for that discussion. But we're going to start by providing a few minutes to report on sort of the context in which this work has been done, discuss community participation in the sort of initial stage of the process last spring, and a little bit about community participation now, and then say a few words about the overall climate adaptation planning process and about some of the products and the report, which hopefully you at least got the chance to scan through. It is in the agenda as a link, and it's quite a report. It's got all sorts of great summary of what the 54 community leaders shared with us. So it's really quite something. All right. As far as context goes, I'm going to turn things over to Linda.
Great. Thanks so much, John. Feel free to just fill all those gaps in, because I know we don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but we think that it's important that everybody know that the city of Oberlin, the community of Oberlin at large, has been working on climate for a long time. So in 2001, the City Council adopted its first sustainability resolution. In 2007, we joined ICLEI. ICLEI is the largest and first international group of local governments for sustainability, and they have really been supporting us throughout all of the various processes, including where we're at right now in our adaptation planning. And then in 2011, the City Council adopted its first climate action plan. And again, fill it in, John. We have revised our climate action plan twice, most recently in 2019. That is our current plan. And just last year, as John mentioned, we initiated our vulnerability assessment, and we are in the midst of our adaptation planning process now and continuing the work. And we are also continuing to work with ICLEI. This is the cover of our current edition of our climate action plan. There were a lot of people involved in the making of this, and the process took about a year and a half, maybe even a little longer. This latest edition asks our community to be climate positive by 2050. There are 113 specific action items within this document, broken up into various categories. We have created a fund to help us meet some of those goals. And this plan has a real emphasis on mitigation. How are we going to reduce emissions in our community? While still recognizing that resilience is critical, and what we're talking about now is adaptation and resilience. And we know there's a certain amount of emissions baked in. No matter what we do or what anyone else does, climate is changing, and it will continue to change. And we want to make sure that as a community, we're ready for that. So community participation is the next part of our agenda. As I'm not going to read all of this, but as you can see, we had a number of people involved in our vulnerability assessment. We decided to focus on these 7 community systems. There were a lot of community systems to choose from, but with help from ICLEI, we narrowed it down to these broad-based categories, realizing that even amidst these, like water, for example, there's stormwater, there's drinking water, there's wastewater, but a lot of people from throughout the community were involved in this process with us. Okay. So ICLEI itself has developed a process to figure out your vulnerabilities and conduct a vulnerability assessment. So this is a 5-step process. We finished the vulnerability assessment last year with the help of the college students in John Peterson's class. It was Bob Hamner, myself, and the class went through this whole process. Jane was in that class, and luckily we got to keep her for a bit longer. The first part of that is, again, conducting that vulnerability assessment and then moving on to setting adaptation goals. So we are moving ahead in that process, and we're on number 2. And then, yeah, go ahead.
So ICLEI describes a 5-stage iterative process for communities when they're writing a vulnerability assessment. And so this is also something we've gone through. And so that process was first to identify climate hazards likely to affect the community, and then identify community systems likely to be impacted, and then assess climate risks, which are impacts of particular hazards on particular systems, and then consider vulnerability to these risks, and then consider adaptive capacity, which would be Oberlin's ability to build resilience or existing resilience. And there's a fair amount of necessary jargon, which I guess I just defined a little bit for you. So I'm going to give you official definitions for a couple of these terms now. So a community system is a grouping of related activities or services that are important to community function. And then climate hazards are changes in climate and climatic events that have the potential to negatively impact important community systems. A climate risk is a specific negative impact of a particular climate hazard on a particular community system. Climate vulnerability is the degree of susceptibility of a community system to a particular climate risk, and then adaptive capacity is the ability of a community system to adjust to climate change and to moderate potential damages.
So what every community wants is to reduce climate risks and its particular climate vulnerabilities and to enhance its adaptive capacity and resilience. So this is a figure that ICLEI has shared with us. Community on the left is one that has not yet engaged in climate adaptation planning and therefore has low adaptive capacity to climate hazards and is vulnerable and is heavily impacted. And the one on the right is one that has proactively engaged in climate adaptation planning and exhibits a high degree of resilience. Obviously, we want to be that one on the right. So in addition to the community systems that we selected, we also had to choose which climate hazards were we going to look at specifically for Oberlin. We didn't do this randomly. We looked at a lot of data sources and we came up with these 7 as these are the ones that will likely have the most impact in our community. Change seasonal patterns. Okay, that's all right. We don't need to read them all. If y'all just take a glance at them. Community systems, again, the 7 that we've chosen, we talked a bit about this already, but water, energy, jobs, emergency services. Luckily, we have Bob Hammer here. Health, food, and culture. And really, we're looking at how the systems interact with the hazards. And again, the community participants, I think maybe this is a duplicate, but we have been working with all of these people to develop and consider what our vulnerabilities and all of the hazards and systems will be.
Yeah, so as Linda and Bob have already stressed, the goal in the process was to gather insight from community participants, and this is a list of participants here regarding climate risks, vulnerabilities, and opportunities to enhance adaptive capacities related to these particular community systems. So way back in February, student collaborators helped to prepare and deliver an introductory kind of Zoom workshop to the approximately 40, ultimately 52 community participants. And the goal was to basically explain the climate vulnerability assessment and adaptation planning process, introduce the Oberlin community systems that we'd selected for consideration, present the scientific predictions of climate change and climate hazards for Oberlin specifically, and then begin to really explore the risks likely to affect particular community systems. So groups of students then coordinated activities associated with these community groups. This included group discussions of the risks and adaptive capacities related to each of the community groups, and then interviews with each participant. So it was a very actually intense process. Everyone in there, this is the way you see on the screen is really a list of lots of people with lots of expertise about Oberlin. And the goal was really to give them information about climate change and then really discover from them, hey, what are we vulnerable to? What can we do about it? So this is sort of just the sort of schedule for how we went about doing that with community partners. The product of again, that first phase of the work was a climate hazard fact sheet and a vulnerability assessment report. The climate hazard fact sheet, and all of these are in the document that was shared with members of CES, was really a goal to summarize the best available scientific predictions of regional and local climate hazards for participants in terms of magnitude of the hazards, frequency, extent of these events. And the good news is, and I didn't mean to go out of the presentation, but this is taking us into Climate Explorer. The good news is that there are actually very, very impressive tools available now for determining local predicted impacts of climate change. There's a lot published on this. The fourth national assessment, US government report, is an extraordinarily extensive document on predicted impacts on different regions. But there are also these tools again, temperate being one of them, and the US Climate Explorer, which I inadvertently popped open for a second because I must have had a link in this presentation to it, which are very powerful tools for understanding how effects are going to be borne out in local places. And I don't want to go into sort of the climate science on this, but basically the IPCC, the governing international body on climate change, has scientists who run a variety of different models. And where this technology, where these models have really advanced is in their ability to downscale data. That is, take this broad set of information and localize it and do prediction on a very local scale. And those tools that I mentioned are the sort of interfaces that one uses to access that data on hyperlocal. So basically, you can type in a zip code and you get out predictions for how climate change is going to impact that particular zip code. So it's really enormously impressive. And so the data I'm going to show you and the sort of summary of data is for the 44074 zip code. So this is predictions for Oberlin. So it's very, very impressive. And again, these big scale climate models are usually run with a variety of different scenarios, a low emission scenario, which makes assumptions that we're actually going to do a good job of reducing emissions and stabilize them by 2040, and then dramatically reduce emissions, and then a higher emission scenario, which is more sort of like the business as usual scenario. So what I'm going to show you for the sample of data and then for the summary of data is sort of banded by those high and low prediction. This is just a screenshot of what the interface for the temperate modeling tool looks like. This is actually coming from neither of those tools, but it gives you a sense of what I think you already know, which is that one of the things we're experiencing is essentially a shift northward of more southerly climates, in addition to more extreme weather conditions. So from just a heat perspective, this is a map of average June, July, and August temperatures historically right now. This is basically what's predicted for the next 20 or 30 years. And again, this happens to be a moderate scenario, so the scenario is kind of in the middle. And then you look by mid-century, and obviously what you're seeing is this sort of upward migration of the climate zones. And as Linda said at the start of this presentation, this is stuff that's basically in the pipeline now. And I think as we begin to look more at the data, one of the things that I think became very apparent to everyone who participated in this is, although the mitigation efforts we're involved in, the commitment that the city and the college both have to carbon neutrality, are absolutely critical to the future of the planet. The reality is there is a lot of change baked in right now, and high and low emission scenarios don't actually make a whole lot of difference for the next 15 or 20 years, because what we're going to experience during that time period is what's already baked into the process. Makes a lot of difference what we do now beyond that. But a lot of the changes we're looking at are kind of baked into the process. So let me just quickly explain to you, this is going to be an example map of average daily maximum temperatures over the course of a year. And what I'm showing you first here is a historical observation. So this is the past. This is our observations about average daily maximum temperature. Not surprisingly, there's quite a bit of variability because there's variability in the world. So that's observed patterns. This is if we use these models, and again, I'm looking at 44074 zip code now. So we're looking at Oberlin, basically. This is if you use the models to sort of like hindcast and predict the data. It just kind of shows you the data for reality falls within the band of what's predicted for the models. We do this as modelers because it gives us confidence. If we can predict the past accurately, it gives us some confidence that we can predict the future. We calibrate our models with the past, and then we predict the future. So this is a prediction of low emission scenarios. So looking forward from now into the future assuming a low emission scenario, assuming we stabilize emissions by 2040 and then seriously reduce them, this is what looks like for average daily maximum. And you can see it's going up pretty steadily for the next many years, even if we're effective at stabilizing things. So that's under the low emission scenario. And now I'm going to superimpose a high emission scenario so that you can see it goes up much higher. And if I put both of them up at the same time, you're going to see the conclusion I just shared with you, which is one that I think all of us took home, which is that it makes a whole lot of difference for our children and the students at Oberlin today, what we do in terms of lower or higher emission scenarios. But the reality is, until 2040, it doesn't make a hell of a lot of difference, which is not to say that we don't need to reduce the emissions, because we care about our children and we care about this generation. But it's just to really drive home the point. We are in for serious climate change no matter what we do. And so while mitigation is critical, adaptation is absolutely critical, dealing with the fact it's going to be a lot hotter and a lot of other things are going to be happening as well. So that's kind of the key take-home point. This is a summary of lower and higher emissions. Again, draws home that point. 2030, under lower emissions, we're talking about 63.5 days average maximum temperature. Again, this is over the whole year versus 64. So not much difference under low and high scenarios. Not even 2050 is it that different, but you get out to 2100, and that's where it really becomes enormous in terms of its impact on us. This is the only other graph I'll show. This is one that I think is particularly important for sort of turning that average temperature into something that's more concrete. These are the number of days with a maximum temperature over 90 degrees. Huge health impacts when you're talking about days over 90 degrees. Huge impacts for someone managing dormitories, for instance, Danielle, about what does that mean to number of days? And you can see again, looking at 2030, no difference whatsoever in number of days under higher and lower emission scenarios. It begins to be really different, but the point is we're talking about historically, we've had about 10 days over 90 degrees. By 2030, we're talking about 30 days of the year being over 90 degrees. So big changes that we absolutely need to address in every aspect of planning for Oberlin College. Again, very relevant to everything. I'm looking at you, Danielle, because I know you're in Res Ed, and big difference for you. So we created lots of graphs like that for lots of different conditions. This is a summary. All of this is in the report. So here are the degrees, the days over 90 degrees. We look at something like the degrees, the number of days less than 32 degrees. You can see those days are actually decreasing moving into the future. Not surprisingly, the winter is going to be warmer as well as the summer. That's actually probably kind of good news as we switch to geothermal heating, because it's hard to heat the air when it's cold. It's easier to heat the air when it's warmer. So, that's probably not a bad thing. It is a bad thing when it comes to disease organisms, tick, things like that. So huge impacts on health potential for warmer winters, because you end up with mosquitoes and ticks moving north, and the diseases that they carry with them. Annual precipitation. Now, this is something interesting to notice here. We kind of anticipated we'd see bigger increases in precipitation, and what is not well captured in this particular data, but is captured in the national assessment reports, is a change in the distribution of precipitation. So precipitation does go up, as you can see, under low and high emission scenarios, but really it's a shift in the timing and the magnitude. So it's not so much as the total amount going up as more intense storms, and particularly in the spring, wetter springs, huge impact for agriculture, drier summers. So impacts for flooding and for agriculture, but they don't come across as well when you look at sort of average annual precipitation as we're looking at here. You see a little bit of that in number of days per year of greater than 1 inch precipitation. Yeah, so a lot of important impacts here in terms of heat waves, and extreme rainfall events, and sort of health impact. That's kind of a summary of what we shared with people as we went into these discussions about, okay, what does that mean for the particular system that you interact with? I think I'm turning it over to you here, Linda.
Sure. So this is a word cloud that we offered to all of the participants. And the first one on the left was day one. So we're in a changing climate. And yeah, basically we said Oberlin in a changing climate, and this was what they shared. And then the second one on the right was at the end of our time together at the final workshop. And it's interesting to see, we still have things like hot in there, but we have leader and resilient and forward thinking. And I think participating in the workshop gave people a sense that there are things that we can do as a community to work towards this.
So one of the things that we asked people at the close of this, all of our experts who participated in this, was their level of concern over the impact of climate change. And I want to make clear that this is not like they reflected on the science, but this is what people in Oberlin who participated in this project were most concerned with. Organized by both systems, so that's what you see going down, the rows going down is the 7 systems we looked at, and then organized by these climate hazards, which are sort of the columns heading out to the right. And you can see, for instance, that the different colors represent different levels of concern. You can see, for instance, that there was a great deal of concern about food in particular being affected by almost all of the hazards associated with climate. So again, the numbers and the colors are both sort of indicative of concern, of levels of concern with these things. And obviously a lot of concern if you look about particular hazards, about extreme hot days and extreme winter conditions, actually. Both of those really manifesting strongly in this particular graphic. So I guess I'll take the first one of these. So again, our process was very much about trying to summarize, deliver information about here's what's going to happen in terms of hazards and climate, and then receive the feedback from the community participants. And so these are some of this kind of summary community insights that we developed out of these things. So with respect to water, which included wastewater, stormwater, and drinking water, one of the main sort of conclusions or insights was that parts of Oberlin's water infrastructure, including municipal and domestic water lines, are aged, and this renders it particularly vulnerable to climate hazards. And so upgrades and redundancy are going to be really important. And I think this has very strong bearing on Oberlin College campus as well, because we maintain some of our own infrastructure for those things, and some of that is also very, very old. These are just some examples of some of the specific insights from participants. The first one from Jeff Bauman, who's the Director of Public Works in Oberlin, and the second one from Jennifer Reeves, who's a stormwater coordinator. I'll just give you a moment to look at those before we advance to another one. I won't read them.
Okay, so the next community insight that we'd like to share with you is related to jobs, which includes employment, job access, and business. Extreme weather conditions such as flooding and windstorms have the potential to limit job access unless plans are developed that address transportation and remote work options. Boy, we can all relate to that, can't we? Expanding and enhancing regional partnerships is an important part of the solution. So again, we'll share some of the quotes of the participants with you and give you a minute to read those.
you really get a sense of of how different groups are really affected sort of in distinct ways by some of the responses that people shared. I feel like Bob should be sharing this one since it's an emergency services one.
Sure, Bob, go for it.
So emergency services includes response times that could suffer as inclement weather, including floods, heavy snow, and extreme storms make transportation more difficult. Emergency service departments can plan and prepare for these challenges through vehicle selection and increased personnel. And again, here's some quotes from our other health emergency service providers. Give you a chance to look at those.
So on the energy front, while Oberlin's electricity is now carbon-free, a diverse electrical portfolio that includes local production and storage will be critical to enhancing adaptive capacity in the face of increased storm frequency and intensity of storm event. And here are some of the comments that were made.
In the health category, which includes public health, including exercise and recreation, high winds, warmer winters, and extreme precipitation events allow disease-carrying insects to travel further into Ohio and survive longer through the year, affecting recreational opportunities as well as health.
In terms of food, climate hazards will likely have a negative impact on local agriculture and vegetable gardens. However, maintaining and enhancing access to quality local foods is critical to Oberlin's adaptive capacity. And I'll just mention before we go on to the next the next one that the groups involved in local foods, Oberlin Community Services, the Food Hub, and City Fresh have been among the most proactive in really absorbing the climate vulnerability assessment and modifying their strategic planning process. It's been extraordinarily impressive to see how fast they've been sort of beginning to really incorporate the climate adaptation into their work and how broadly they've done so. Really very, very impressive work.
So the culture group, obviously it's critical in our community, but also quite broad, but it includes community and culture, including green space. So the role of art in enhancing community resilience is to be relevant to current challenges, help people cope, and bring people together across division.
Yeah, in many ways, for me as a participant in this, I was sort of most impressed by the culture group. The other part, I sort of intuited a lot of what I might get, but what came out of the group focusing on arts and culture was really, really extraordinarily impressive in terms of its breadth of thinking about what's special about Oberlin and how do we adapt in a way that keeps those special things, since we're a community that is so focused on art. So here's another insight from that group. We gave them a few because they had such a broad area to cover. Extreme hot days pose equity issues, especially in terms of access to air conditioning, pools, and public drinking water. These issues can be addressed.
And, oh no, sorry. We're still in this one.
The issue of equity was one that, was very central to almost all of our discussions, because, the burdens of climate change are so disproportionately borne by lower income people, older people too, younger people as well.
So because culture was such a big and broad category, we have yet a third insight. Oberlin can increase the adaptive capacity of its green spaces through intentional design choices made in response to climate change.
Again, these are giving you sort of a sense of the real diversity of thought that was brought to bear on how we adapt in these many different systems, and through many different lenses of thought. One of the more sort of, I would say, optimistic aspects of this is the alignment, potential alignment between the actions we're already taking as far as mitigation goes and adaptation. And, I mean, in a broadest sense, what we're talking about here is how do we get all these different groups within this community to work together in ways that are synergistic and advance, everyone's interests at the same time, but in a way that sort of considers everything. Lots of individual examples of alignment with the CAP, with the Climate Action Plan, in terms of water, increasing residential and commercial rainwater capture and reuse can both reduce carbon emissions and prevent flooding. As far as energy goes, I think you were going to do these alignment things, Linda. Sorry.
Yeah, why don't you fire them all out at the same time?
Okay, I'll do that.
So yeah, we talked about the Climate Action Plan and how the community has been working on them, and we've had several iterations of them. And the good news, as John mentioned, is that there is a lot of overlap with our attempts to reduce our emissions and also work on our vulnerabilities and adaptations. So John mentioned the water, in energy, and these are just one example from each category, and there are more. We are exploring energy storage technology in jobs, enhancing public transportation. You might know that we now have a 5-day-a-week dial a ride bus service, and with expanded hours and into the evening. And we also have 2 electric car share cars in our community, with more on the way. Emergency community communication system created. Health, we're weatherizing homes through power, providing Oberlin with efficiency responsibly. Food, increase local foods consumed in Oberlin through a variety of means, and culture, improving active transportation opportunities. We're working on sidewalks, multi-use paths. City Council actually just passed a very progressive plan that is a multi-year plan to look at all of the sidewalks and multi-use paths, and allocated funds to make improvements. So we're all very excited about that. And then this diagram just shows some overlap. So on the left, you have mitigation actions. So things that are going to reduce emission and that we're actively working on. And then on the right, you have the adaptation actions, like things that can really help us adapt to our changing climate. And then in the middle, you have, the overlap, where they meet. And I don't know if that's too small for you all to read, but I'd rather not read it all to you. So take a minute, read through that. Tell me if you can't see it, actually. All right, so planning and action underway. Organizations and municipal departments asked, 1, how do you anticipate integrating climate vulnerability assessment and adaptation planning into specific organization planning processes you're currently engaged in? So we asked, the various organizations, city departments, groups, what processes are already in place? We don't want you to do something new, but what are you already doing where you can consider including adaptation? And what current actions and initiatives is your organization engaged in that might be described as addressing climate vulnerabilities, enhancing adaptive capacity to climate change? And we're going to share with you some things that we learned. Power, for example, in their planning, they're reviewing climate hazard fact sheets for planning. They are increasing attention on AC to buffer against extreme temperatures. Oberlin Public Works Department, in their planning, climate vulnerabilities carefully considered. They have a stormwater master plan, a water distribution strategic plan, and water and environmental protection facility. That is our wastewater protection. And the action is significant emphasis on addressing stormwater. Oberlin Community Services, they are increasing flexibility in food sourcing, distribution, and rescue programs. Food rescue and farm food rescue programs reduce waste and increase equity and access to local foods. So again, these are things that they're already doing. So the good news is we don't have to start from nothing. Our Allen Memorial Art Museum, in their strategic planning process that will examine our future facilities needs in light of climate vulnerabilities, and working to ensure optimum performance of the museum's heating and cooling system in the event of extreme heat, cold, and/or power outages. And so next steps. So we have completed the vulnerability assessment, and we are working now as a community, the city, the college, multiple organizations through our community, to set adaptation goals. And as we talked about, these goals will be individual. Each organization will be including goals that they might include in a strategic planning process, but also there may be places where we see we have gaps and areas where one organization isn't able, or doesn't encompass the whole plan, where we as a community have to come together. So in defining our vulnerabilities and then deciding ways to adapt, we need to look at who will be responsible for those activities. And that's what this year, probably 18-month process will entail. And the rest of this process is to, implement our plan, measure our progress, iterate on the process. It doesn't seem likely that it is a plan that is going to stop. As climate changes, we will adapt accordingly, but we will have a structure in place through this process that will enable us to, I think, continue this in an ongoing fashion.
So just to mention, there is now a climate action task force, which is sort of what resulted from the initial plan, the presentation to City Council. City Council sort of moved to have us establish the climate adaptation task force. And the primary goal of the task force is to assist organizations in educating their leadership, constituencies, about climate vulnerabilities and adaptation opportunities, and then support these organizations in efforts to really incorporate climate adaptation into their organization's strategic planning processes. And then, as as Linda has mentioned, really facilitate that collaboration. And just as some of the examples of collaboration that are so critical to the success of this process, we know we're going to be exposed to a lot more really high heat days. How can we share cooling centers? Can we increase the availability of public drinking water? things like that. Shade trees being another thing that there's a lot of room for collaboration on across the various different entities. So there's a lot of work that individual entities have to do, but there's also a lot of work that are going to benefit from really strong collaborations among different groups. So that's kind of the presentation in summary. Love to get some feedback from our small group we've got here today. Again, we didn't have our biggest CES group here ever, but I'm going to go ahead and end the presentation here, because that's, I think, about where we wanted to end, and just open things up to discussion. Obviously, a lot to digest, a lot in that report, but a lot of work for folks in Oberlin College, as well as folks in organizations within the city. So, yeah, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think for me, it was really nice because like I always hear about this stuff, but I never see actual data on it being presented. So it was really nice to see that from my local area. And you are 100% right. It will have a significant impact on living in the residence halls, because students are already complaining. You know, we had students this summer. We're never used to having students over the summer, and we didn't have air conditioning in almost any of our buildings, and they were struggling. And we don't allow AC units because the electricity in the building can't handle that capacity. So yeah, we've got a lot of work to do structurally to make it more manageable and livable for the future, for temperature wise, for the most part.
Okay, so I've seen this presentation a couple of different times in a couple of different contexts. And every time I just think to myself, oh my God, you guys did such amazing work. And thank you so much for the service that you did to our community. Just so valuable. And I feel like a whole bunch more people at the college need to see this presentation, like a whole bunch more. And I don't know how to make that happen. I don't know what the, like, is there some way that we can, okay, this is not something that would work in our current situation, but the thing that popped into my head was, can we bribe people with food and, get them into a room, and we can't, because we're not allowed to be in a room together and feed people, but it just, like, I'm so glad. I actually have never met you, Danielle. I'm Cindy, and actually, are you new at Oberlin, or?
I've been here for almost a year now, but
Okay,
I started during COVID,
new.
so
Yeah,
no one knows who I am.
Yeah, and so I teach a class where we do a lot of behavior change campaigns, and so you and I may be interacting with each other in the future. So it's great to meet you. But so I'm so glad that Danielle is here. But how many other Danielle counterparts are there in different departments who really need to have this information? And what can we do to convince them that I have no idea what the right strategy is, but I think that we need to think about that. And that needs to actually be a serious push, because us, even if the entire CES were here, that's still not enough people. More people need to know this. I'll get down off my high horse now.
I wanted to say, yeah, just echoing that, I really, really appreciated this presentation and found it like very, very informative, especially like I feel like when you first hear like vulnerability assessment, it feels very like abstract. And so to be able to like actually see the way it was implemented all the way through, and like how, because I feel like obviously there was this template or like outline of how you do it, but there's no one way to like decide what is, how a community is vulnerable. And I think like the way so many different stakeholders were like involved in all of these different systems was really, really impressive. And I feel like I learned a lot from this.
Yeah, I feel like for me, as I said earlier, I hear about all these scary things all the time about how things are changing in the world, and as a young person, I'm like, oh, crap, like, what is my life going to look like? And so this, in a weird, not in a weird way, but like pretty straightforward way, actually like gives me some sort of like safety and peace, at least knowing that like people are trying to like look ahead, where I don't necessarily feel that in my day-to-day life, but seeing this, I think it's impactful for me. Because I'm like, oh, there are things I can do. I don't just have to like sit here and hope for the best. Obviously there's a lot of that, but you know, I can do other things. So this for me has been really impactful because like I want to get, you know, more involved where I can.
I have a meeting in 1 minute, but I wonder if if a subgroup of us might meet with somebody like maybe Rebecca Skillings, who I think gets this stuff, gets the importance of this stuff, and try to brainstorm with her how we might reach out to more people at the college. I don't know, Linda and John, do you think I'm totally off base? And
no, I think you're absolutely on base. You know, it's presenting this made me think, you know, initially we had this thought that we would be sort of like running these presentations for a bunch of different groups. And, you know, for a variety of reasons, we ended up with the task force and shifting our energy into that. But even sort of like giving the presentation again sort of does make me think, yeah, we really didn't reach most of the community with the information. They're obviously not going to read the report. And it's totally true at Oberlin College. I mean, you know, as someone who thinks about climate a lot, the process for me was really eye-opening. So I can't imagine it's not eye-opening for people who don't think about it so much, you know?
And you know, you could potentially schedule one, you know, like open one something for faculty. And I can imagine some faculty would tune in, but and I think that, you know, that's not a bad thing to do, but but I don't know. I just feel like we need to be more aggressive. As I want to use a more positive word than aggressive, proactive, and in figuring out how to communicate this to people. I just think what you guys did is so high quality and so useful. And it really makes it so like much more concrete, you know, just yeah. So I don't know. I mean, what if
we did?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was thinking, you know, we've been thinking a lot about how to get the community engaged in the whole SIP conversation and understanding what's going on. It occurs to me we could use some of that same methodology and reaching out, like we could have a community Zoom where we do this presentation and not just focus on faculty, but the community at large. I mean, that's maybe the only good thing about Zoom is there's no real limit to number of people. It is a little frustrating to have only, you know, 5 people when you do it, because you're like, wow, there's so many people, and to do it again and again. But if we could have it scheduled and then really work to promote it, maybe that's the solution. I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah, I think I do really think like we never did. I mean, we presented this publicly in the sense that it went before city council, but you know, that's you know, how many people show up for city council meetings? Not many.
Yeah.
I do feel like it makes sense to do some sort of maybe both the college and the community, because I think what you really want afterwards is a bit of a discussion.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, and it might be different discussions in the community and the college.
Is it possible that you could create a somewhat condensed recorded version of this? And so like, I'm imagining a situation where, I don't know, Rebecca Skillings, there's some all hands meeting where a whole bunch of people are going to be gathered in one place, and we get an hour on the agenda and they watch a half-hour video so that Linda and Bob, John, and I've forgotten her name, the student. Jane, yeah, don't have to show up every single time, right? But then one of us is there to be part of the conversation. I don't know, just a thought. I'm late to my meeting, so I have to go, but cool. Thank you again and again.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you. I'll see you all.
Yeah, take care.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, Linda and Bob, I do think that we just never got this out in front of enough people. I think that's true. Alas, this wasn't a wonderful turnout, and
yeah, too bad. And last night we really missed the college presence also.
Yeah. I don't know what to do about that,
I think
honestly.
that one, because there are a couple people on the committee, they assume if they're not going to make it, the other one comes, and the reality is neither is coming. I feel like maybe we need to point that out. I don't know exactly who or
Yeah,
how.
in terms of CES, I think part of our problem is that we
But
don't
not
know.
just CES, but the adaptation task force also.
Yeah, I felt like one of the problems last night with the task force was people are not clearly designated with the group that they represent. So they're just like people, as opposed to you are the designee for this. You know what I mean? I think we might need to be a little bit more clear that you're representing a particular group. Because I do feel like, when we went around, it's like, well, I have all these hats. Yeah, but what hat are you wearing right now? Let's go through your, let's have you designated for a hat.
Sure,
I mean,
I
you
get
can have
that,
people
but
who have two hats, but they know they have the two hats.
it did feel to me though that the real absence was the college. That
I know. I don't know what to do about that. I think honestly, I'm hoping that having a new sustainability coordinator is sort of going to help with that, because I feel like with CES too, I mean, I don't really have power of persuasion over different people. I feel like if there was someone who was really, trying to make sure that people were there. I mean, he may have had a good reason for this, but Josh Jensen, our communication person, our communication person didn't get this presentation, he had a reason why he couldn't be here, but that's like if the communication doesn't have this, then it's hard to they just put together this very nice PR piece on the SIP